Hello, good evening. Welcome to the Happiness of Pursuit podcast with Dr. Raj. I'm Dr. Raj Langani. I'm the founder of Enhanced Psych and Enhanced Psych Network. I'm board certified child, adolescent, adult, sports, and executive psychiatrist. And I'm created this podcast to provide actionable insights to you all for improving your mental health and fitness, to be able to live your best lives, maximal life fulfillment, and to talk about and explore new technologies and disruptions in psychiatry and mental health. So this is May, and in honor of I'm an Army medic veteran as well from the 2000s. It's actually the number one thing that propelled me to psychiatry and now doing psychedelic assisted therapy is all the PTSD I saw while in the military. And I'm doing talks this month with military heroes. And today I have a very special guest, Mr. Hugh Harris. He's actually the father of my assistant, who I've known since 2018 when I moved to Jacksonville. And when I was looking for good military heroes to talk with, she told me, hey, why don't you try my dad? He's the hero to me. So I'm very happy to have you. Thank you for joining me, Mr. Harris.
Thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure. And would you like to go by Mr. Harris or Hugh? Or I feel
Hugh's
like
fine.
he was okay. All right. When we're around your daughter, we'll try to we'll go to Mr. Harris again.
Okay.
But yeah, let me talk a little bit about you. I'm gonna give you a little intro information to the audience. So, Mr. Hugh is a Navy uh a Navy sub operator during the Cold War from 76 to 84. He worked at Allied Bendix Aerospace, quality control tester and inspector. He worked for JEA coal plant for a while, and now, most recently, volunteered and been an officer for the last 10 years with the American Legion Post 401, supporting our veterans. So thank you for that, Hugh. And with that, I wanted to first start just by asking, as I do with everyone, what is your mission and right now? What is your why?
Well, part of it, after spending that time in the military, is looking out for the veterans, making sure they get what they need. It's not always a easy thing to work with a VA and get the things they need, and sometimes they don't provide what you need. So we help out with that as well. But
Okay.
I tease my daughter a lot. I said one of my main purposes is to make somebody smile or laugh every day. Bring a little joy
Oh,
into their life. So,
that's a good one. And did you always have that with you, or did that kind of change over time?
well, some of the time it was fun to aggravate her with it because she would kind of get embarrassed when she was younger. But it makes you feel better and it makes them feel better to change their day, make it a little better. So,
Yes, sir. Can we start from the beginning? If with your childhood, if we could, what about your childhood would you say? Can you tell me and tell the audience that has made you the man you are today? Do you have some defining moments?
well, I had a um, pretty strict upbringing. My mother, she didn't expect anything less than the very best you could do. So you had to take care of a lot of your own business and all, but when it came to schoolwork and all that, you better get it done or else. And when it came time to graduate high school, I was ready to go to Georgia Tech. I was going to surprise them that I'd already been accepted and everything, was going to go into an engineering program. And I was oldest of 5 kids. So they were ready for me to get out of the house. And they fussed at me one day about talking to the recruiters because I kept hanging up on them and all. And they came into one of the meetings I had with them, and they were pushing the nuclear power thing. They trying to meet their quota for that, I guess. And I got involved in that. That's the hardest school I've ever been through. They say it's equivalent of 2 years of like MIT or Cal Poly or something like that you do in 6 months. reactor physics and
Wow.
math and all that. And then you go to prototype training for 6 months. I went out to Idaho, and you actually operate a nuclear power plant. And I was close to the end. I on a call home talking to my mom. And I said, well, doesn't seem like I'm going to make it, Mom, but I'll be home for Christmas. And she says, well, we don't have quitters in this family. So if you don't make it, don't come home. So I packed my bags and I had
Okay.
a bunk room on the site and I went out there and stayed until I was done.
Hey,
But
mom was a tough cookie, huh?
oh, yeah.
Very hard to high standards.
Yep.
Did that help prepare you for such a tough school?
Yeah, it did. And I don't know, all through my life, she was that way. And when my dad went back to finish school, she was making, she was proud of him because he had made the dean's list and all this stuff. And I said, well, geez, Mom, he wanted to come back home, didn't he? And she's like, what? And I said, he couldn't come home with anything less. That's just the bar you set for us. So, but it was good.
Yeah. Wow. And from what I know from knowing about your story a little bit from your daughter, you suffered some tragedies too growing up in your family with
Yeah,
in terms of mental illness. Would you be comfortable talking about that a little bit?
I don't have a problem with it. No, it'd be fine.
Yeah, because I know mom was tough and it made you tough. And would you mind sharing a little bit about what you've kind of had to experience with mental health?
Well, that part of it, she didn't want us to be weak. She wanted us to be tough and protect your family, look out for your family, that kind of thing. I had a brother that was just younger than me. He had a lot of issues. And back then they used to blame it on a chemical imbalance or something like that. But um,
They still kind
he
of do.
tended to, yeah, he tended to be, he's one of those that would be cruel to animals at times. He would pick on people just to put on a show for other people and stuff like that. And he ended his life at 26 because he had gotten into a relationship, got married, and it was falling apart and he couldn't deal with it. And
Hmm.
I felt like he kind of didn't have anybody to talk to at that. So that's kind of,
Yeah, I'm so sorry. And did he like? Were there signs looking back that
um,
do you ever feel guilt or anything? Or
I didn't feel guilt, um, but I wished that I had known so I could have maybe helped change his mind.
yeah.
And of course, now this is one of those where my mother kind of blamed me
Hmm.
for his decision because I was in a relationship at that time she didn't like, and she twisted that. I told her, I said, "You've been reading Psychology Today for years now, and you're analyzing all of us, and I don't know, and maybe that's why you've decided to do this, but I didn't have anything to do with his decision. That was a
Right.
broken heart, and he felt like he had nobody to talk to." And
Right. And suicide is just the most devastating. I'm fortunately, like wood, I haven't experienced in the patient. I've had psychiatry attendings that I've had in the past training. And it's just other mentors say like they all lost at least one patient to suicide, and like there's nothing worse. And um, the amount of shame that can come with it, and just guilt, shame even more than guilt because there's something wrong with me, not just what I did. So it's
right,
even more difficult to deal with. And so coming to terms with, and then self blame as well as like being upset at the person,
right,
like they quit or they gave up or they're gone and they're no longer in pain. I am, and it really takes a lot of empathy, which is going to be a key word, I think, today to get to where you said, which was very wise, which is like there's nothing we could have done. I mean, I know there's maybe a controversial thing to say, but you can't look at coulda, shoulda, woulda And also like the person, you almost have to get to a place of peace sometimes. Like that person was in so much pain that that was just was going to happen. Like, and you tried your best.
Yeah.
And they also, part of depression is withdrawing and not letting people in as well.
Right.
So, I mean, what kind of lessons maybe came from that for you as far as like, do you check on people now more? Do you things like that?
Yes. And that's one of the things we really try to do with the Legion is look out for our members and anybody else that
Mhm.
may be headed in that direction. And there's organizations out there that help with that too that can hopefully get you some help. And but you never know. They had a member that he wasn't real active, but he was going through financial problems, had a drinking problem, and then the next thing I hear, he had hung himself. And never would have thought it at that time. But then when you hear from his family all the pieces that we didn't know, and you're like, oh wow, okay. And again, we couldn't have done much for it, but if you knew more, maybe you could hit it off. I don't know.
Wow.
Sometimes you just got to have somebody to talk
Sorry.
to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I've had patients before, and it may not be totally by the book, but I think the radical empathy will win out for the most part in terms of getting the better outcome. Even though like it's by the book, hey, hospitalize, give medicine if they're already in the hospital, don't let them out the hospital, be scared by suicide, be very risk averse, which understandably so. Like the theory is like they're in this space and they're sick and we got to get it better and do more. But like
Yeah,
rather what I've noticed that worked best was just it's going to empathy. Like whether Voss talks about it from Black Swan and Never Split the Difference. He was a hostage negotiator for the FBI, and he talks about like the hostage takers, the perpetrators, the criminals. They would really just want him to understand why they took the hostages.
yeah,
And so he actually started, and I thought this was so interesting. He started before being in the FBI hostage negotiation in the suicide hotline. So it's a lot very similar as far as like patients saying in the hospital, "Hey, like I all these treatments have happened. I just want to die." And some other countries, like in Europe and Canada, like there's just assisted euthanasia almost for these kind of cases. But like
yeah,
once you're like, "Hey, like this is definitely not by the book." So for you guys that are like residents or nurse practitioners, therapists, you might be like, "This is totally wrong." But there's a times where you're just being human with the person, and it's like like there's more that could be done, and like help me understand why. And if I would not judge you, basically is the point. Like if you were to do that, I would judge you. Like, and then they're like, because you understand why, and you're not judging me for it being that's so key. That
right.
non-judgmental radical empathy. Like I no longer want to do it, and because I really like human connection is that important. And with addiction, which I know you've also dealt with, not necessarily personally, but around you and close people
Oh yeah,
close with you. We could talk about that. It's we say like addiction, connection, like connection's the opposite of addiction. And it's the same kind of like predisposing factors that lead to depression. And with that, we all kind of notice that in ourselves a little, maybe in different degrees, and in others with COVID, when there was like the first day of the quarantine, so many calls the suicide hotline because of that, like times several times more that very day in March 2020. So that's how important connection to us, and we're still kind of having a mental health crisis as a result of the lockdowns and all the sequelae from the COVID. So um, you've had other experience with suicide and as well, right, in your family?
um, that's how my father ended his life. When I shortly after my brother committed suicide, I had a major fight with my parents, my mother mainly, and we actually did not speak for 8 years. Um,
Oh,
and I actually ended up marrying the girl that she was fussing so much about. And sometimes I wondered if I didn't do that just to spite her because of the way she was acting, but she wasn't giving me credit for knowing what I was doing. And she was thinking it was all surrounding drugs. And I'm like, no, that's not it at all. But um, it it lasted 8 years and we divorced. And then in the meantime, I found out my mother had cancer, and they showed up at my grandfather's burial. And I'd taken care of my grandparents for 3 or 4 years or so. And I'd gone to Atlanta to bury him, and they showed up at the burial. So there was our reunion, and that was kind of weird. But then we started talking and seeing each other again and all, and that was good. Mom she was the strong one. She always managed the money and all. And after she passed, and she had 3 or 4 rounds of cancer, but when she passed, Dad got married not soon after, 5, 6 months maybe. And then that wife died. She was diabetic. Then he got married again to someone he met online. And that didn't last. He found out real quick that she was taking a lot of medication, self-medicating.
Oh.
And then he ended up losing control of his money, felt desperate, didn't talk to nobody. And one day I'm getting my phone's blowing up from both of my brothers that are still living, and I'm like, oh, something's bad. And found out about that. But he was an only child. He didn't know how to share things. And me and him, I joined the Navy and I went on submarines because he had been on submarines.
Oh,
trying to
like
connect.
father, like son. Yeah.
And it never really worked out. It was just he was proud of me for getting through nuclear power training and all that stuff, but
yeah,
I don't know. We didn't connect and actually, this is kind of funny part. I didn't know until I was probably 26 that my mom was pregnant with me when they got married. I was a product of their senior trip. And I said, well, now I know why my dad hates me. Because I ruined his life.
Did he actually ever say that, or you just joking?
No.
Yeah, good. Okay, good. Man, because I've definitely, unfortunately, seen that, and but he was difficult to connect with, and a lot of it was dealing with his own depression. It sounds like,
And probably.
and untreated, and it was different times, I think, too, with that, and obviously it's still a very prevalent, in the veteran community, we see like a lot of untreated self-medicating. Maybe a majority of people who are struggling are self-medicating.
Yeah.
In society, unfortunately. Um, so now with your brother, so how far apart were those suicides you experienced in your family between your dad and brother?
Um, a good 20 years between them.
Wow. And so there's definitely that family psychiatric history, which is very strong predictor as well. And then also like the contagion kind of aspect, which we see more in teenagers of like, it already happened to someone near me. Like you see it in schools, the school near us, Ponte Vedra High, had like a rash of suicides over a few years when I first started my practice, right before that. And it's like, oh, it's maybe the way to deal with stress. It's already like lowered the bar maybe on it because it's happened.
Yeah.
Like people are such social creatures, whether it's a really good thing, like making someone laugh, and that could spread that, or it could be a very negative things, unfortunately,
Right.
sometimes. And you see that with mobs or this kind of contagion effect, whether it's with suicide or other mental health identities. Someone say, like Abigail Shriver talks about with the trans, it was a
Yeah.
social contagion.
Yeah.
I know it's a controversial topic, but we know teens, they want to fit in. And but
Yeah.
in families in this case too, it's like that already happened in my family, so that is an option. And there's also that genetics of like low serotonin we see in the cerebral spinal fluid in people who both in the families of people who've suicide, like that's a genetic trait. And so that really like increases the risk of suicide. So that's a very strong genetic kind of predisposition too.
Yeah.
So does how you cope with that? I guess long story long question short. How do you cope with that? That this is in your family, and have you ever really like consider that when you got really down, or how did it affect you, how you kind of go about things? Because you've been through some tough stuff.
I would say that it's part of the human mind to consider drastic things at some point in your life.
Hmm. And
I've never,
that is not like necessarily high risk all the time because a lot of people have fleeting thoughts and they're not high risk for suicide.
I don't dwell on it. It's not a solution for me. There's always a better way to handle it. I had a friend in South Carolina when I was stationed up there. Went to lunch with him, and during the lunch, he said, "Don't ever hurt yourself over a woman. It's not worth it." I said, "Yeah, man, there's too many of them out there." And he killed himself the next day. I'd gone on vacation, didn't find out about it for 2 weeks. I came back, and a mutual friend got implicated for it at first, and I'm like, man, that's crazy. But
Mm.
I mean,
Yeah, when it happened to one of my best friends growing up, we went to senior trip together in high school to I grew up in Iowa, so uh, going to the Fort Myers, which probably now that you live in Florida, I live in Florida. It's like, oh, this is a spring break spot, but like, is the people who didn't go to Cancun went to Fort Myers, and
yeah,
oh, that's where we went. It was kind of the lesser trip, the lesser crazy one, a cheaper one.
yeah,
And we had good time. Just 3 years in high school. Went to that trip. That's what I was trying to look back on. Freshman year of college, I went to University of Iowa. A lot of my close friends did the state school. He went to the other one of the smaller state schools, University of Northern Iowa, and he uh had a he was in the frat, and there was a girl and breakup and then suicide by hanging. And that was the one friend that I lost close to me that was from suicide. And here's someone else, it's unknown sometimes, right? Like if they drank them too much, like, and they
right,
were found, like, was that suicide or not, right? With drugs. But that just always touched me. And I was in Hawaii at the time training in AIT, advanced individual training, as you know,
yeah,
uh, as a medical lab tech in Tripler. There's a lot of military, all the military there, going to Pearl Harbor a lot. And I was in Hawaii, so I couldn't fly all the way back to Iowa for the funeral. That always killed me. But um it was just like, wow, like what would get someone to be so down in that moment? Like a lot of us, at least most of us maybe, have had our hearts broken from something or someone at some point, but to get that down in that situation. And I always wanted to be like, that's not weakness. Like there's a reason his mind, I don't think we totally have free will, like genetics, let alone depression was so much. And then teenagers, adolescents, you just want to survive in advance, as like in March Madness, like
yeah,
impulsive, black and white thinking, unstable relationships, inability to see into the future. Actually, someone I'm gonna have on soon, he wrote a great book. Jess Shakin, he's shout out to you. He's a head of in NYU child psychiatry, and he wrote this book, Born to Be Wild. And he talks about he had all these NYU students that he taught raise their hand, and he's a child psychiatrist as well, but he would teach the course on psychology to undergrads, and he would have them raise their hand about like how many of you think if you have unprotected sex you're gonna get pregnant or get HIV, and you would think like no one raised their hand because they think they're invincible, but instead it was the opposite. Everyone did. It's like they don't know how to look into the future. They don't. Most teens don't even. And now I look back, I'm like I was the same way in a way, like couldn't really see deep into the future. The people who can, that's amazing.
yeah,
To make a plan when they're like 16 to 18 or whatever. But it's like they don't even think they'll survive past like 2025. So it's like, what the hell? Just like YOLO.
yeah,
And so I think I looked a lot at the case of that case. I'm sure you had to have with your family members to try to understand, like, and make sense of it. And what does this mean when we're really at our feeling rock bottom? But I'm sure it sounds like you said, getting a fleeting thought, that doesn't mean, hey, that needs to be hospitalized. That's why our main job is risk assessment to see, like, what are all the risk factors? And, you know, is this something that can be treated? Does this need to be an inpatient for safety reasons? But most of the time, it's like treatment really happens outpatient. And that's why, like, I'm an outpatient psychiatrist. We can usually prevent it, we can connect, just being available. So, people are lonely often and just have no one to talk to, as you said.
Right. Um,
So,
that, this isn't exactly related to that, but it's kind of on that line. My best friend from high school died a couple of years after high school. He's type 1 diabetic. And we played football together, ran track together, all that stuff. And I used to keep candy around whenever his blood sugar dropped too low. I would be able to help him out. Coaches would just send, Harris, go get it. But he was such a strong physical person, and he didn't like admitting that he was dependent on the insulin shots and stuff. But that's type 1 diabetic. That's something you got to do. And he was going to college or whatever at the time, and went into uh, he passed out driving and flipped his Jeep. And I didn't find out for quite a while, but I was just amazed. I was like, oh man, that's somebody you can't replace.
yeah. Ugh. Okay. So then at what age were you, or what stage were you where you met your wife, your first wife?
First wife, that's kind of a background on that. While I was in the service, um, service life is very hard on a relationship. And the Navy with the deployments is even rougher because you can't take them with you. And so I waited until after I got out, and I met her at that Allied Bendix Aerospace where I was working. And it was kind of one of them things where I was young and available, and she was young, and all the guys wanted her, and they're all pushing us together. And but she had kids from previous marriage, and I didn't really want to get into that, but I ended up doing it, and and it was good at times, but she had lived the wild side a little bit too, and she got thinking that she had grown up too soon, having kids so young, and she wanted to go back to doing her thing. And I'm like,
Mhm.
adios.
Wow. But you kept raising those kids.
I kept in contact with them, and
Uh-huh.
to this day, I stay in contact with them.
Wow. Yeah, because my sister, your daughter, told me that they weren't your biological kids, but they owe a lot of their success to you, they say. So that meant a lot to stay in contact with them, and whatever you did. I'm sure you're
And
under valuing what it was, how much
that's,
how power that had.
yeah, that's what their mother told me after we started speaking again. She's like, I was so mean to you, and I owe the success of my kids to you because me and their daddy, neither one were worth it. I'm like,
Oof.
I wouldn't say that, but I was glad I
Yeah,
was a good influence. So,
absolutely. So this kind of mentorship, taking care of people, being, someone that you can come to, like, this has been a kind of a theme for you, like, at least since uh military times into that, what you're doing with the American Legion.
right, everywhere you go, you can be a mentor
Yeah,
and share your knowledge and share your compassion too, maybe.
absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely. And tell me then, like, so with your daughter, I think this is your one biological child, right? Your daughter?
right.
Yeah, so her mom, because she's had her struggles. We both know. Can you talk a little about that? Like how that's because I mean you had already gone through some couple struggles with like in mental health in your family. Tell me about how it got to.
Well, Y2K was a big deal. And I had to work at the power plant that night to make sure that the computers changed over when the date changed.
Mhm.
And the next day was January 1st, and the Sugar Bowl was playing. The Gators were playing in it. So I went to Gators Dockside to watch the game.
Oh yeah, I love that place.
And I met her there. And I wasn't looking to meet anybody. I was just up there watching the game, and she started sharing food with me and stuff. And before it was over with, she wrote her name and number on a napkin and passed it over if you're interested, kind of thing. So I'm like, oh, what the heck,
Yeah,
won't hurt to see her a minute anyway.
yeah,
That was rough because I didn't know what I was getting into. She she has done a lot of different non-prescribed things, and um, I don't know how many seizures she's had, how many overdoses, and all that. I tried to get her in with psychiatrists, with everything else, and I've got mental health books in my bookshelves here that I was studying and trying to figure it out,
yeah.
and I couldn't help her.
Oh,
And there was one point one night that she had really got me upset, and I looked at her and I said, "Well, just be glad that we're not Muslim because honor killing is in order right now." And
oh.
she had done so many bad things, and
Right. And it's wild how much substances, drugs, illicit drugs can take over the brain circuitry where that becomes the number one fixation. There's stories of like people, if you put $1 million in front of them or a bunch of cocaine, for instance, they would go for the cocaine rather than $1 million. They could buy even more cocaine because that's just how much the brain is wired to it. And it leads to a lot of manipulation often or just shame, like from depression even, but this having to hide it from people, not tell the truth about it, manipulation, like it just kind of tends to go together often. And it's often, self-medicating, self-harming in a way, behaviors that go with like cluster B personality, which are like kind of borderline personality and so on. Like it's another form of self-harm instead of like cutting or
yeah,
suicide attempts or or suicide gestures. It's like substance use or could other risky behaviors. So here's like one thing I always struggle with, and I'm sure you did. If with all my training, like I still struggle with it, and that people are always asking me about with things like addiction, empathy versus accountability. Because we said empathy is going to be the theme here. Like with someone depressed and suicidal, you're like, I'm giving you all my empathy. When it's addiction, somehow, even though I still consider it a mental health arena for the most part, like, addiction. But it doesn't make it okay at all what they're doing. But I'm trying to empathize with why, and then recognizing that the brain circuitry's been hijacked now, and as a way of getting to the better outcome. But a lot of providers, and I've been guilty of it too. We're gonna give the empathy and like for you, and let me try to understand it, but not have the accountability part, like maybe with drug tests or urine tests or uh like what or reward punishment kind of scenario where at least if it's clean, you're not using, get a reward at the least, a positive reinforcement that tends to be better than punishment in the long run. But sometimes needing punishment, some people need a kick in the butt, not just a pat in the back, right? Like they
right.
have to hit a rock bottom, like a family has to cut them off and for them to change. Like there's certain people are wired that way differently. What do you think about what I'm saying? Like, can you relate to that?
Yes, I can, and that during that marriage, there was multiple times that she would get in trouble legally, would be locked up and whatnot. And Duval County has the Matrix program for people that are offenders that have a drug and alcohol problem. They put you through certain steps of that. And she was in that program and was right at the end of it where you transition to like a halfway house or something kind of thing. And the company that was doing that wasn't set up for it. And she got frustrated with them, so she just quit, just walked out. And her probation officer was looking for her and whatnot, but she had promised me that she would complete that program. And I told her, if you don't, then I'm going to push for full custody of our daughter. And I did. I got emergency custody, and I stipulated that it had to be supervised visitation. And that led to breaking my daughter's heart. And you mentioned cutting earlier, and that was part of her solution. And that was tough, but you don't know what to do with it. And then I was at work, working night shift one night. I get a call from her boyfriend, my wife's boyfriend. Let me know that she is just overdosed and she looks pretty bad. I don't think she's going to make it. You probably want to try and get out of there and come home and take care of things.
Wow.
And so once I got off the phone with him, I called emergency dispatch to make sure they had an ambulance coming out. And they were telling me that it was just an overdose. And I said, do you know the nature of the overdose? And they said, no, do you? And I said, yes. I said, Xanax and alcohol. And they're like, well, how much Xanax? I said, well, I haven't ever seen them, but I hear they got the bar form of it. And she took a handful of Xanny bars and she chased it down with alcohol. I said, how much alcohol? I said, a fifth to a quart, somewhere in there. So if you haven't sent an ambulance yet, just go ahead and cancel it and send the coroner out to do his report. They're like, what? And they ended up with 2 ambulances out here. Wow. And I get home, I got them. My priority right then was making sure the kids were okay.
Yeah.
And I checked all that out. And then I went to the hospital. And she did not like going to the former university hospital, UF Health or whatever it's called now. When she came out of that overdose, she realized she was in there, started yanking IVs out, throwing hospital personnel every direction, and they're trying to get her under control. She's going to leave the hospital. And I tell them, I said, well, if you've got a shot ready to give her, I can provide you the chance to give her a shot. And they're like, without hurting her? Yeah, So I took her to the ground, rolled her up, pulled her sleeve up, and they popped her. And where she had pulled IVs out, she was bleeding all over the place and all, and I'm covered in blood.
We're not supposed to call that chemical restraint, but that's really what it is. I mean, you're treating agitation, and she's trying to leave against medical advice, and you're got to do what you got to do here for the safety of everybody, starting with her.
And I didn't want her getting any more trouble. And I didn't want to get in trouble. They called security, but they were nowhere around. So I did that. And the female doctor that she had that night was trying to figure out someplace to put her. And they were supposed to do a Baker Act on her, but the deputies had already left. So they had nothing to go on. And I said, well, do you need me to sign something or what? I've heard it takes a couple of family members, but I'm here. said, "Oh, your signature will be enough, but where can I put her?" And I said, "Well, she's been a patient at Timbrook before." And they said, "Absolutely great. That's good. I can get her in there." You know, boom. And
So
about 4 days
Hugh,
later,
I'm sorry, go ahead. Finish your story. Sorry.
about 4 days later, it was when they were allowing her visitation, and she called and asked for me to come down and talk to her. And she had calmed all that down by now. I'm like,
Wow.
yeah, okay.
So Hugh, let me ask you something. When you have a case like this where your wife's boyfriend's calling you that she overdosed, how do you find again empathy versus accountability? You're not wanting to enable, but obviously do the right thing, and it's still the mom of your child, and you were still married at the time, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, and and then of course your military. I've just puts together so many different things about you, like your military experience, or just the way you're wired would deal with an emergency and being calm and cool, collected. Like, take me through your emotions at that time when he called you. Like, take the audience through those emotions if you don't mind.
Well, to be truthful, um, I thanked him for calling me. He had started out that I'm in absolutely the worst place I could be. I have no business being here, and I understand if you're upset. And I said, "Well, yeah, okay, Bobby, that's good." And he told me what he had to tell me, and I said, "Okay, now I appreciate you calling me, and I will do what I got to for my family and all. And I just want you to know that as soon as I get everything taken care of, I'm going to be hunting you down, and I'm going to take care of you." And when I got to the house, the police were still here, and my wife's truck was missing. And I called to the scene commander before I even came home that if that individual was still there, he was going to be filling out paperwork for homicide too. And they ended up letting him leave with the truck with my nephew. And I said, "Neither one of them got a damn driver's license. Is this the way you guys handle business?" I said, "You were going to kill him."
That's certainly understandable. I mean, that's what I was trying to really ask, click on was how do you find the way to reconcile all these different emotions of anger and fear, maybe, and empathy and sadness. I'm sure it was just such a mix hodgepodge of feelings.
I actually was guilty of trying to do too much to protect the kids from all this. It's why I stuck out as long as I did. I would have left her a long time before.
Mm.
But
Did
it
that take
just,
a toll on you too? Like your confidence, your esteem?
I'm sure, but I, reflect afterwards, and I said, there between the drugs and her background and all that, that's not my fault.
Right. But I
Things
mean,
happen.
this was traumas to you in a way too.
Oh,
I mean, not
oh,
maybe even some big T traumas, honestly, because you're like dealing with that situation here,
yeah,
and then an affair. That's also traumatic. So at least, and then I'm sure there's many, many, many stories also beyond
yeah,
that.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
Well, God bless you. You're still here to tell them it, and you didn't end up in prison. So good
yeah,
job with that too. Because,
yeah,
like you said, like Serenity Prayer. I mean, they start every AANA meeting with that, and it's so powerful to me, and that's why I have it up behind me. It's you can only control what you do and how you respond to things, your
that's
behavior,
it.
how you respond to things, and your boundaries. Which you said, like if you had to go back, you might have set them more strongly. And I think boundaries become a big issue with when you get to personality disorder traits and addiction.
Yeah.
And so, all right, well, I think we're winding down on time, but this has been incredible. I definitely want to do this again if you're up for it. I know it's kind of becoming like somewhat of a therapy session. I hope that's okay with you.
Well,
uh,
that's kind of funny that my daughter says, "Yeah, Dad, you got problems too." You know, and And I diagnosed her mother with one thing that really affected me is passive aggressive disorder, but that's no longer on the list of mental illness. It used to be, and
Oh,
they took
yeah,
it
yeah, yeah,
out.
yeah.
You
Yeah,
know,
that's just a very common immature defense that most of us use at some point or another.
but she was an artist at it. She could manipulate the people around her
Yes.
and do things for them to buy their silence and continue to do what she does. And she was so
Shit.
bad that she would be carrying 2 to 3 cell phones and keeping her different worlds separate. And I'm like, oh my
It
goodness.
can get real like complex, like drug dealer complexity with burner phones and all that, right?
Yeah.
Jeez. Um, I kind of want to wrap it all together, and as we're getting to the end here, we had a closing tradition that we just started. The first guest, your guest number two, they had a question for you. Like I was like, can you give me a question for the next guest? And so he had this question for you. With your specific expertise, how can you see, and I think that he meant like as a nuclear submarine operator, but also down to now the work you've been doing since. With your expertises, I'll say, how can you see yourself and other veterans having and leaving an lasting impact on the world? And he was another fellow veteran who's doing great things in the world like you.
Um, well, where we talked earlier about not having a real plan, that's the way most people live their lives. But that's one thing that nuclear power taught me is that we have procedures that we had to live by. There was a very good reason for them to write them the way they did. And if you followed them exactly all the time, you would get the best results you could get. If you don't have a plan, then you're allowing room for mistakes to be made. And whatever that is in your life, if you can get some level of organization, you can do much better. And I I read a book recently, and I can't recall the author, but I believe the title of it was something like "Make Your Bed." It's like you get up every morning, you make your bed.
Oh yeah, I think
Uh,
this is Jordan Peterson kind of a 12 habits
yeah,
for
and
success or
and that was people that visited us when we were kids. They would see us get up every morning and make our bed because we knew we'd get our butt kicked if we didn't. But there's just little
yeah.
things that make your life better if you do them.
Right. That's so important, I think, we should double click on it for a second. The little things add up because a lot of times people are afraid to take action. I think this is something our military people are really good in. I mean, a lot of us, we have lives past that with business and other endeavors, and they don't have the same stakes to them as life or death kind of decisions in the field or in the hospital and so on. Uh, and I think those tough experiences, it's about it goes against our nature, which is to inhibit action and survive. But like the people who take action are the ones who win, and a lot of times that's just a bunch of baby steps added up on each other to
Yeah,
small iterations, and then make an adjustment.
yeah.
And you try to break it down to a small, and that's something Jordan talks about a lot too. And I heard Jocko Willing, was a former Navy SEAL, talk about as well, which is like makes the smallest choice and decision, and then all right, that goes well, like keep going or add more to it. Doesn't go well, like you can at least turn around, go backward, but at least you have movement. It's very hard to, Newton's law, like very hard to get started, but once you get started, it's easier to keep going.
Yeah.
And that kind of like make your bed first thing, you get the momentum going. It gets easier to do the next thing and the next thing, even if you're super depressed. Like now get your feet on the ground. Like now take a walk outside.
Hmm.
And those things can add up. And I think you're like a testament to keep going, even when you've had so many tough, and probably much more than even what we talked about here. But these seem like some huge ones that you've dealt with. Tragedy to that level of trauma. You kept going through it all. Like, what's next for you?
I I don't know. I'm retired now, and I'm I'm still learning the financial world. Interested in that. I'm interested in teaching. My daughter, I've tried to teach uh, all the kids in the family, but there's a very easy, you know, not terribly easy, but if you develop those habits of just putting a little money aside and putting in a safe, growing investment, and you don't touch it, and you live off the rest. Um,
Yes. The
I
power
think
of compounding.
yes, the richest man in Babylon. That's
Yes.
an old
Yes.
book,
Amazing book. Yep.
and I read that, and just something that simple. You put 10% into an investment, and you don't touch it until you're in
Do
your
you know
retirement.
who got me to read the richest man in Babylon was Rick Ross, who know the big drug dealer in LA.
Oh yeah,
And that they made the show on FX that's on Hulu, which I really enjoyed. Snowfall, like it's based on him, his life,
yeah,
and like he ended up incarcerated, and he read that Rich Man Babylon several times. Now he came out and he's mentoring, go back to mentoring theme, people, in jails, out of it that are in risk for it, like gangs, and being successful like post incarceration because of applying those principles, like, and it's a lot better ways to do it than drug dealing, which won't end you in prison, and where you could do moral and ethical and very good things for the world,
right.
and hiring people, serving people, bringing value. And I just want to thank you so much, Mr. Hugh, for coming on. And I really appreciate it. I could see why your daughter is the amazing person she is, just in spite of a lot of tough things happening, which we've kind of touched on some of them here, and more. Your stepkids who, credit their success to you. Then all these people at American Legion. You're about to be an officer again there, right? Or a higher level even officer, commander.
Commander, yes,
American Legion Post 41, like all those vets, many whose lives I'm sure you touched so much and saved even. And all the people that when you save a life, you're one of my attendings said in child psychiatry fellowship when I was at MUSC in Charleston, when you help prevent a tragedy like by getting someone's depression who's suicidal better, like you're not just affecting that person, it's so many others. All the
right,
ones that they'll affect in the future too, and all
yes,
their family and their family. Like it's just such a ripple effect,
yes,
and it's compounded. And yeah, you've done that for so many people and for the world, and just a testament to resilience. And do you have a question that you would want for the next guest on top of your head? Otherwise, you could send me a message later.
I can't think of anything right
Okay,
now.
send me one later. Like, and that's make sure to ask that one for the next guest. We'll do that afterward. But I thank you again, and I just wanted, your story was just a reminder that we should be kind to other people. We never know what other people are going through. Kind to ourselves, empathy for ourselves and others, so key, and you're worth it. And I just want to thank everyone for coming and enjoying this conversation with Mr. Hugh Harris. Thank you, Hugh.
All right, very nice meeting you.
You too, and I hope you have a good rest of your night.
All right, you too.
Thank you, sir. Take care.
All right,
Bye bye.
good night.